My name is Rosemary Keller. I'm 46 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that if you showed up, consistently paid your bills, kept your word, and treated people with decency, things would eventually balance out. I wasn't raised to expect praise. I grew. I grew up in a working class family in Missouri where effort mattered more than noise, and dignity came from doing what needed to be done without making a spectacle of yourself. I built my contracting business the same way I built my life, slow, steady, brick by brick. I don't argue for attention. I don't beg for appreciation. I've always believed that if you live right, the right people notice. What I didn't understand back then was how dangerous that belief can be when the people closest to you start mistaking silence for consent. I met Daniel Wright when I was 34. He was calm, thoughtful, and had a tired kind of kindness that told me life hadn't gone exactly the way he'd planned, but he was still standing. He ran a small logistics operation and was freshly out of a marriage that, according to him, had ended quietly and without drama. He had a son, Evan, who was 10 at the time, sharp-eyed, polite on the surface, distant underneath. Daniel spoke carefully about his ex-girlfriend, Lauren Evan's mother. He said she wasn't very involved anymore, that she drifted in and out, that Evan had grown used to disappointment. I didn't see that as a warning sign. I saw it as a gap one I could help fill without trying to replace anyone. I didn't come in trying to be a parent. I just showed up. I went to school events. I learned what snacks Evan liked and which ones he pretended to hate in front of friends. I sat through science fairs and soccer games, standing just far enough back not to make him uncomfortable. When Daniel worked late, I made dinner. When Evan struggled with homework, I helped without hovering. I figured consistency would do what force never could. Daniel always told me how grateful he was. Evan didn't say much at all. At first, I told myself it was normal. 10 is old enough to remember life before a stranger enters your home. I kept my expectations low and my patience high. If Evan forgot to say thank you, I let it go. If he walked past me without acknowledging the effort I'd put in, I swallowed the sting and moved on. Years passed like that, quietly. When Evan turned 16 and asked for a car, Daniel looked at me before answering that familiar pause where the unspoken question hung in the air. I offered to match whatever he could contribute. We bought Evan a used sedan, nothing fancy, but safe. Evan didn't thank me. Not then, not later. When he totaled it 2 years after that while texting behind the wheel, I paid the insurance deductible. He didn't apologize. Daniel told me teenagers don't think about consequences the way adults do. I nodded and agreed, even as something small inside me started to bruise. By the time Evan got into college, a state school a few hours away, Lauren was completely absent. Daniel was stretched thin financially. I offered to cover whatever scholarships didn't. No loans, no conditions, just belief. Evan accepted the offer with a nod and a distracted, "Okay, thanks," before disappearing back into his room. I kept writing checks, semester after semester. I sent care packages, birthday cards, small amounts of spending money tucked into envelopes. I never told anyone how much I spent. I wasn't doing it for recognition. I was doing it because I thought family was something you invested in, even when the return wasn't immediate. What I didn't realize was that some people don't see generosity as love. They see it as infrastructure, and the moment you stop maintaining it, everything collapses. The thing about being reliable is that people stop noticing the effort behind it. They stop asking if you're tired. They stop wondering what it costs you. Reliability becomes background noise, comforting, constant, invisible. After Evan left for college, the house felt strangely hollow. Daniel tried to fill the silence by talking more about work, about plans, about Evan's future, but he never quite noticed that I'd started listening differently. I wasn't absorbing his words anymore. I was measuring them. Every semester, the bills came directly to me. Tuition statements, housing fees, meal plans. I reviewed them carefully, the same way I reviewed contracts for my business, checking dates, totals, fine print. I paid on time, always on time. Evan never once asked how it was handled, never asked if I needed help, never asked anything at all. Daniel would say things like, "He's lucky to have you, usually in passing, usually while distracted," and I knew he meant it. But there was something about the way he said it, as if my role was already settled, already assumed, that made my chest tighten just a little. When Evan came home for breaks, he treated the house like a hotel he didn't bother checking out of properly. Shoes kicked off wherever, dishes left in the sink, laundry abandoned mid-cycle. He spoke to Daniel when he needed something, and to me only when I was standing between him and whatever he wanted. Do we have any cash? Can you drive me to the store? Did you pay the phone bill yet? Always you. Never please. I started noticing how Daniel would subtly smooth things over. If Evan snapped, Daniel would laugh it off. If Evan ignored me, Daniel would say, he's just in his head. And every time I felt the urge to speak up to say something sharp or honest, I talked myself down. He's young. He'll grow out of it. This isn't worth causing tension. I had become very good at minimizing myself. The first real crack came during Evan's junior year. Daniel mentioned casually, almost carelessly, that Evan was thinking about switching majors. Something about needing extra time, maybe an extra year. That'll cost more, I said, not accusatory, just factual. Daniel hesitated. Yeah, I figured we'd talk about that. We did talk, or rather, he talked, about Evan's stress about how competitive everything was, now about how unfair it would be to pull support when Evan was already so close to the finish line. I listened, nodding slowly, feeling that familiar pressure settle in my chest. At no point did Daniel ask what I wanted to do. At no point did Evan come downstairs to explain to ask or to acknowledge what the extension meant for me. I agreed anyway. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning above us and realized something that unsettled me more than anger ever could. I wasn't being taken advantage of aggressively. No one was yelling, demanding, threatening. They were simply assuming I'd always say yes, assuming my resources were communal, assuming my patience was endless. The ache inside me grew slowly, almost politely. A missed birthday text here, a forgotten holiday there. Father's Day would come and go, and Daniel would get a quick call, maybe a gift card. I'd get nothing, not even a "Hey Rosemary" scribbled at the bottom. Once Daniel noticed. He touched my arm while we were doing dishes and asked softly, "You okay?" I smiled. I always smiled, just tired. That became my default answer. When Evan finally graduated, Daniel was ecstatic. He talked about it like it was a collective victory, like all the years of tension and silence and swallowed disappointment would somehow crystallize into a moment that made sense of everything. I wanted to believe that too. I told myself the graduation would be different, that people grow up, that milestones bring clarity, that maybe finally Evan would look at me and see more than a utility. Hope can be a dangerous thing when it's the only thing you have left. Graduation days have a way of making you feel like everything you've endured was leading somewhere specific. Like all the quiet compromises, the swallowed words, the long nights and early mornings were just the price of admission for a moment that finally made sense of it all. Daniel certainly felt that way. Weeks before the ceremony, he was buzzing with energy planning details, talking about photos and seating arrangements, already rehearsing what he might say if Evan asked him to speak. He didn't ask Evan, of course. He just assumed the moment would come. Evan, on the other hand, was clear about one thing: no big party. He said he wanted something small, low-key. Just dinner, close friends, no fuss. Daniel agreed immediately, eager not to upset him. I suggested something simple but still celebratory, a catered setup at a nearby park pavilion. Nothing flashy. Daniel loved the idea. So I handled it. I booked the pavilion coordinated. The food truck arranged tables, chairs, lights, even brought a portable generator just in case. The week before the ceremony, I drove up early with Daniel to help set things up. I stayed late stringing lights while Evan went out with friends. I didn't mind. I told myself this was part of it, that the work behind the scenes mattered, even if no one ever clapped for it. The morning of graduation, I ironed my blouse carefully, smoothing out every wrinkle, like it might somehow smooth out the years behind us. I sat in the bleachers as Evan's name was called, clapping with everyone else, watching him walk across the stage with that same confident stride I'd seen since he was a teenager. Pride swelled in my chest, not because he was mine, but because I had helped get him there. The speeches came after. Evan took the microphone, smiling relaxed, clearly enjoying the attention. He thanked his professors, his friends, his roommate. He thanked his mother, Lauren, even though she wasn't there. He thanked a barista who remembered his order. People laughed. Someone wiped away tears. Then he thanked his childhood dog. "I wouldn't be the man I am without him," Evan said, voice thick with emotion. The crowd murmured approvingly. I waited. He looked out at the audience and added, "And to the people who made this possible, you know who you are." That was it. No glance in my direction. No name. Not even a vague acknowledgement that might have included me by accident. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, staring at the ground between my shoes. Daniel clapped hard, beaming. I followed his lead, my palms meeting hollowly, like they belonged to someone else. At the pavilion later, I stayed busy. Grilled burgers, refreshed drinks, smiled for photos I knew I'd never look at again. Evan moved through the crowd like a host, laughing, confident, alive. He barely spoke to me. As the sun dipped and people started packing up, Evan approached me, holding a manila envelope. "Here," he said, handing it over casually. "That's the catering invoice." I blinked. "Excuse me." "It's about 1,300, he said with a shrug. "Mom said you'd probably just pay it since you handled everything else." I looked at the envelope, then at his face. That same expression I'd seen too many times before, not cruelty, not even anger, just assumption. I nodded, said nothing, walked toward the parking lot. Halfway there, I passed a trash can near the entrance. I stopped, looked around once, and dropped the envelope inside. That was the moment something finally gave way. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clean and final. I didn't know it yet, but that small, quiet act, the refusal to pick up what had always been placed in my hands, was the first real boundary I'd ever set. And it was about to change everything. The fallout didn't arrive the way I expected it to. There was no immediate confrontation, no raised voices in the car on the way home, no accusations thrown across the kitchen like broken plates. If anything, everything felt normal. Too normal. Daniel didn't notice the shift at first. He was still riding the high of Evan's graduation, replaying moments aloud, pointing out people in photos already talking about what Evan might do next. I listened as she nodded. When appropriate, added the occasional, "That's great," but something inside me had gone quiet. The constant internal justification, the one that had narrated my life for years, had finally stopped talking. A few days after we got home, Daniel asked if I'd paid the catering invoice. "No," I said. He looked up from his laptop, genuinely confused. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I didn't pay it." There was a pause. Not a dramatic one, just long enough for him to realize I wasn't joking. He waited, eyebrows raised, as if more was coming. An explanation. An apology. I didn't offer either. "Well, I'll cover it then," he said slowly, clearly unsettled. He clicked back to his screen, but the moment had already lodged itself between us. From that day on, Daniel watched me differently. Not with suspicion, exactly more like someone who senses a shift in gravity but can't quite pinpoint the cause. I still went to work, still cooked dinner, still paid bills. I just stopped anticipating needs that weren't voiced, stopped volunteering solutions, stopped cushioning every inconvenience before it reached anyone else. Evan didn't call. That wasn't new. He'd moved in with friends across town, and weeks passed without a word. Daniel filled the silence with updates I hadn't asked for. Evan's job hunting. He's thinking about Austin. He might do some certification short programs to boost his resume. One evening, while we sat on the couch, Daniel brought it up more directly. "It's not too expensive," he said, scrolling on his phone. "A few thousand for the first course. It could really help him." I kept my eyes on the television. "That's nice." Daniel glanced at me. "You think we could help him out just this once more?" I muted the TV. "I paid for 4 years of tuition," I said calmly. "I bought him a car. I covered insurance, housing, food, and I never asked for anything in return." Daniel sighed. "Rosemary, you know how he is." He didn't mean anything by that speech. He was nervous. "He thanked a dog," I said, before he even looked in my direction. "That's not fair." "It's accurate." Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Daniel rubbed his face, frustration creeping in. He's 22. He doesn't think about these things. He's old enough to know what respect looks like. That night we went to bed facing opposite walls. No fight, no resolution, just a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted beyond repair. 2 weeks later, I came home to find Evan in the kitchen. He was barefoot, shirtless, eating straight out of the fridge like he owned the place. He barely acknowledged me. "Hey," he said around a mouthful of food. "You guys got any more of that turkey?" I walked past him without answering, grabbed a drink, and went outside. Daniel joined me a few minutes later. "He's staying the weekend," he said carefully. "Job interview Monday. Thought it'd be easier." I nodded. "Okay." But inside something hardened. That weekend, Evan left laundry on the couch, towels on the floor, dishes in the sink. I cleaned none of it. Daniel noticed. Said nothing. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning. I was in the garage fixing shelves when Daniel appeared, phone in hand, expression tight. "Evan's in a bind," he said. "He got a job offer, but it's unpaid for the first few months. Startup thing. He needs a place to stay, just temporarily." I stared at him. "He wants to move back in," Daniel added softly. "No." Daniel blinked. What? No, I repeated. He's not moving back in. Daniel's face flushed. Rosemary, he's struggling. He's a grown man who treats me like a convenience, I said evenly. I'm done being an ATM in my own home. Daniel stared at me like he didn't recognize the person standing in front of him. For the first time in years, I didn't soften my words. And for the first time, he realized I meant them. The tension didn't explode right away. It seeped. After that conversation in the garage, Daniel grew quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not angry, not loud, just distant. His phone buzzed constantly, and I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Evan's name had a way of vibrating through walls, through silence, through everything we'd been avoiding. We moved around each other like strangers sharing the same space. Polite, careful, detached. One night I came downstairs for water and saw Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, elbows propped up staring at his phone. His eyes were red. He didn't look up when I entered, and I didn't ask what was wrong. We had both crossed the point where pretending concern felt honest. The betrayal didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly on a Wednesday afternoon when I came home early from work, after a job site inspection got rescheduled. There was a moving truck in the driveway. For a split second, my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe the neighbors, maybe a delivery. But the logo on the side didn't belong to anyone else on the block, and something cold slid into my chest as I walked toward the front door. Inside, I heard voices. Evan's voice. I stepped into the hallway and saw him directing two movers as they carried boxes toward the guest room. Careful with that one, he said casually. Just put it against the wall. I froze. What's going on? I asked. Evan didn't even turn around. Just moving my stuff in. My heart thudded once hard. You didn't ask me. He laughed like I'd said something mildly amusing. Daniel said it was fine, just for a bit. I walked past him and into the kitchen. Daniel was standing there, arms crossed, face pale. Is this true? I asked. He didn't answer. Daniel. He looked away. That was the moment. Not anger, not rage. Just a clean, unmistakable snap, like a rope, finally giving out after years of strain. I turned back toward the living room. Stop, I said to the movers. Take the boxes out. Evan spun around. What? I said take them out. Rosemary, chill? Evan scoffed. You're being dramatic. I'm not your friend, I said calmly. And this isn't your house. Daniel stepped forward. You don't have to do this. Yes, I said, voice steady. I do. Evan rolled his eyes. Daniel said I could. Daniel doesn't own this house, I replied. I do. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Daniel's breath caught. You're really pulling that card. I'm done being walked over in my own home. Evan laughed again, sharper this time. Whatever. You're just bitter. I've got potential. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but clarity. You have 5 minutes to get your things out, I said, or I call the police. You wouldn't. Try me. The silence that followed was thick, almost physical. The movers shifted uncomfortably. Evan stared at me like he was waiting for the old version, the one who softened, who backtracked, who apologized for boundaries. She didn't show up. Evan swore under his breath and stormed out. The movers followed. Daniel stood there shaking. I can't believe you did that, he said. I met his eyes. Believe it. That night I slept in the guest room. Not because he asked, because I knew what was coming. By the end of the week, Daniel had packed a bag. By Sunday, he was gone. He took closed personal items and the quiet assumption that I would eventually call him to fix it. I didn't. For the first time in years, the house was silent in a way that felt earned. And I knew without doubt that whatever came next would be worse before it got better. The silence didn't feel sad at first. It felt sterile, like a hospital room after visiting hours. Too clean, too quiet, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see whether I would break down or finally breathe freely. Daniel didn't leave a note. He didn't need to. The signs were enough. Half the closet emptied, his tools gone from the garage, the coffee mug he always used missing from the cabinet. Little absences that spoke louder than any argument ever had. I went to work the next morning like nothing had happened. That surprised me. I woke up early, made coffee, fed the dog, and drove to the job site. I talked through renovation timelines, checked measurements, approved materials. My crew didn't ask questions. They never did. They knew when to give space. At home, I cleaned, not in a dramatic, scorched earth way, just methodically. I cleared the fridge, organized drawers that hadn't been touched in years, vacuumed corners that had collected more memories than dust. Every room held echoes. The dent in the wall from Evan's scooter, the pencil marks on the door frame tracking his height, the kitchen counter where Daniel used to lean while talking about his day. I didn't erase them right away. I wasn't ready to pretend none of it mattered. Work became my anchor. I took every job that came in big or small, easy or inconvenient. Not for the money, for momentum. Forward motion felt safer than reflection. A month later, on a Thursday night after a 12-hour drywall job, I sat alone in the living room with the lights off. Family photos still hung on the walls. One in particular caught my eye, the three of us at a pumpkin patch years ago. Evan laughing hay stuck in his hair, Daniel's arm around my shoulder. I stood up, took the frame down, and opened the back. I didn't throw it away. I placed it in a shoebox in the closet, along with 6 others. By Sunday, the walls were bare. I joined a gym the next week. Nothing fancy. Fluorescent lights, old machines, the kind of place where nobody cared who you were or why you were there. I hadn't worked out seriously in years, but the ache of sore muscles felt honest, earned in a way emotional pain never was. I slept better, ate better, woke up with less dread. Then one evening, I found an envelope on my doorstep. Handwritten, no stamp. Evan's handwriting. Inside was a typed letter. No greeting, no apology, just paragraphs explaining that he hadn't meant to make me feel unappreciated, that he was under pressure, that feelings sometimes get lost in the noise. He hoped things wouldn't be weird and that I'd still support him in whatever way feels comfortable. Support him. I folded the letter once and placed it in the drawer without responding. That weekend, I drove to a lake 3 hours away. Just me, a cooler, and a fishing pole. It rained the entire time. I didn't care. I sat under the dock listening to water hit wood and thought about how many years I'd spent being useful instead of being valued. That was when I started making changes that mattered. I reviewed my business paperwork, updated beneficiaries, met with my lawyer, removed Daniel from everything, rewrote my will, took the savings I'd once earmarked for Evan's future and invested it into my company instead. Within months, the business grew. New contracts, new crew, new equipment. I wasn't rebuilding. I was rising, and no one saw it coming. The first warning didn't come from Daniel. It didn't even come from Evan. It came from someone I barely spoke to, Trisha Reynolds, Daniel's sister. We'd never been close, cordial at best, the kind of family connection that exists mostly in polite nods and small talk over store-bought desserts. After the separation, I assumed I'd never hear from her again. So when I saw her name pop up on my phone one chilly October afternoon, I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Rosemary, her voice said, after the beep, hesitant, careful. I'm not sure if I should be calling, but I thought you deserved to know. Evan's been talking a lot about your business, specifics, client names, where your crews are working. He joked about undercutting jobs, said something about leveraging experience. He was laughing. It just felt wrong. I'm sorry if I'm overstepping. I listened to the message twice. I didn't feel angry. I didn't panic. I smiled, because that was the moment I knew walking away hadn't been cruelty, it had been clarity. And it was also the moment I realized I'd spent years playing defense when I should have been protecting myself. I didn't confront Evan. I didn't call Daniel. I researched, quietly. One of my subcontractors, Leo, specialized in IT and smart home integrations. I'd bailed him out years earlier after a botched install nearly cost him his license. I invited him out for wings and beer, and halfway through the second round, I asked casually, "Can you check if anyone's sniffing around using my company name?" Leo didn't ask why. He never did. 3 days later, he sent me screenshots. An email thread between an Austin contractor and someone claiming to be affiliated with Keller Contracting Group, my company. The email address was a cheap imitation. The signature line listed Evan Wright. He was offering discounted bids referencing projects I'd completed, leveraging a reputation he hadn't earned. I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't entitlement anymore. This was theft. What Evan didn't know, what Daniel never bothered to ask, was that earlier that year, during my rebuild, I'd trademarked my business name, branding, legal protections, everything locked down, and my lawyer, Harold Hank Mason, lived for situations like this. When I showed him the evidence, he laughed, not amused, but impressed. "Do you want quiet or loud?" he asked. "Quiet," I said, "for now." The cease and desist letter went out the next morning. Certified, formal, impossible to ignore. 5 days later, Daniel called. I didn't answer. His voicemail was tight rehearsed. "Rosemary, Evan got something from your lawyer. He's really upset. Says it's a misunderstanding. Can we please talk?" I deleted it. Because this wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about someone who thought my years of effort were an inheritance he could cash in without permission. And I wasn't finished yet. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, thick cardstock heavy in my hands, like it expected something from me before I'd even opened it. Gold foil, wax seal, vineyards and cursive fonts that whispered money and image. It was addressed to Ms. Rosemary Keller, no Daniel, attached no afterthought. Evan was getting married. Her name was Julia Harper. I'd met her once briefly, months earlier. Polite smile, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who measured rooms the moment she entered them. The invitation promised an elegant ceremony by a lake, black tie, optional, intimate guest list. At the bottom, in soft gray ink, monetary gifts preferred. I laughed out loud. Not bitter, not angry, amused. Because suddenly everything made sense. Evan didn't want reconciliation. He wanted optics. A clean photo, a generous check, a quiet return to the illusion that nothing he'd burned behind him mattered. I didn't RSVP. Instead, I made a list. First, I called Lisa, the single mother in Austin, whose rental Evan had taken money for and never finished. She recognized my name immediately. He said he trained under you, she told me, that you'd check the work. I'm sorry, I said. He lied. There was a pause. Then I'll put it in writing. Next, I reached out to 2 contractors Evan had contacted while pretending to represent my company. One forwarded me a fake invoice Evan had sent. Another had recorded a phone call. Sloppy, arrogant, confident no one would ever check. Leo archived Evan's now deleted website screenshots, source code, stolen testimonials lifted straight from my reviews. Hank organized it all into a clean, devastating binder. Over 60 pages. Not dramatic, just factual. Then I mailed it. Not to Evan, not to Daniel. To Douglas Harper, Julia's father, a retired insurance executive, a man whose entire career had been built on risk assessment and fine print. The binder arrived 2 weeks before the wedding. I didn't hear anything for days. Then 5 days before the ceremony, my phone rang. Ms. Keller, a man's voice said, calm, controlled, slightly shaken. This is Douglas Harper. I received your package. Yes, sir. A long pause. I appreciate your discretion, he said finally. The line went dead. 3 hours later, Daniel texted me. What did you do? I didn't respond. But Tricia called the next morning, voice tight with disbelief. According to her, Douglas had called an emergency meeting, spread the binder across his desk, asked Evan to explain each page. Evan couldn't. Douglas didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply withdrew every dollar he'd committed to the wedding. Venue, catering, photographer, honeymoon. I will not have a fraud marry my daughter, he'd said. Julia moved out within 48 hours. The wedding was canceled, not postponed, canceled. No announcements, no explanations, just silence. I didn't celebrate, I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. The strange thing about closure is that it rarely announces itself. There's no drum roll, no final confrontation where everyone suddenly understands the damage they've done. Most of the time it arrives quietly, like a door you realize has already closed while you were busy living your life on the other side of it. A week after the wedding collapsed, Daniel sent me a long message. Paragraphs. Careful words. He said he hadn't known the full extent of what Evan was doing. That he'd been blinded by loyalty, by guilt, by the fear of losing his son completely. He said he missed me. Not in the vague way people say it when they're lonely, but in the specific way that suggests regret has finally found a voice. He asked if we could meet, not to reconcile, he claimed, just to talk. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a walk around the neighborhood with my dog, Max. The leaves had started to turn the air sharp and clean. Max trotted beside me, tail wagging, like the world was uncomplicated and kind. I envied that ease, but I also understood something I hadn't before. I had already done my talking. When I got home, I reread Daniel's message once, then I deleted it. Not out of spite, not to punish him, but because reopening old conversations doesn't always heal anything, it just reminds you why you left in the first place. Work was thriving. I had expanded the business, brought in new leadership, started stepping back from the constant grind. There was a young project manager on my crew, Miguel, who reminded me of myself at his age, quietly driven, respectful, eager to learn. I'd started mentoring him, teaching him the parts of the business no one ever teaches you unless they believe you've earned it. One afternoon, after I handed him partial signing authority on a project, he asked me why. Because you show up, I told him, and you don't confuse opportunity with entitlement. He smiled like that meant something. It did. I never heard from Evan again. No apology, no explanation, just absence. and for the first time, absence felt like relief. Some evenings, I'd sit on the porch with Max, coffee in hand, watching the sun sink behind the houses across the street. The quiet no longer felt empty. It felt intentional, chosen. I'd spent years believing that love meant endurance, that if you stayed long enough, gave enough, swallowed enough, things would eventually even out. What I learned instead was simpler and harder love without boundaries doesn't make you generous. It makes you disappear. And I wasn't disappearing anymore. I raised my glass once alone in my backyard and whispered, "Thanks for the lesson." Then I went back inside into a life that finally felt like my own.